episode 107 of Toke Signals TV, where we bring you the biggest in cannabis and hemp news stories every week. I'm Steve Elliott, the editor at TokeSignals.com, and I'll be guiding you through the news. First, let's look at our Toke Signals bud pick of the week. A strain I developed, Frankenberry here, from Frankenstein and DJ Short Blueberry. It's 75% indica, and she's ready to smoke. Let's do the news now, shall we? In the United States, big news this week as the Senate approved a funding bill that allows veterans access to medical marijuana. The U.S. Senate on Tuesday passed the fiscal year 2016 Military Construction and Veterans Affairs Appropriations Bill, which includes language to allow VA doctors to recommend medical marijuana to their patients in states where medicinal cannabis is legal. The language was included as an amendment in the Senate Appropriations Committee in May. Veterans in medical marijuana states should be treated the same as any other resident and should be able to discuss marijuana with their doctor, said Michael Collins, Deputy Director of National Affairs for the Drug Policy Alliance. It makes no sense that a veteran can't use medical marijuana if it helps them and is legal in their state. The Veterans Equal Access Amendment was sponsored by Republican Senator Steve Daines of Montana and Democratic Senator Jeff Merkley of Oregon. It passed the committee 18-12 in a bipartisan vote. The funding bill will now be negotiated with the House's version as part of an omnibus spending bill. On this eve of Veterans Armistice Day, where we remember those who served in the military and the treaty agreement to reach peace concluding World War I, we see this victory as a step toward a peace treaty with the government we volunteered to defend with our lives, and as a step toward restoring our First Amendment rights and dignity as citizens of the United States, said T.J. Thompson, a disabled Navy veteran. Now, currently, the Department of Veterans Affairs, the VA, specifically prohibits its medical providers from completing forms brought by their patients, seeking recommendations or opinions regarding participation in a state medical marijuana program. The Daines-Merkley Amendment authorizes VA physicians and other healthcare providers to provide recommendations and opinions regarding the use of medical marijuana to veterans who live in medical marijuana states. In 2002, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals affirmed in the Conant versus Walters case the right of physicians to recommend medical marijuana regardless of its illegality under federal law, as well as the right of patients to receive accurate medical information. The Daines-Merkley Amendment supports that First Amendment right and restores a healthy doctor-patient relationship. There are numerous federal health care programs besides the VA, such as Medicaid, Medicare, and CHIP, but only the VA prohibits physicians from discussing and recommending medical marijuana to their patients. A Medicare patient may freely discuss medical marijuana use with her doctor, while a returning veteran is denied that same right. Studies have shown that medical marijuana can help treat post-traumatic stress and traumatic brain injury. These are illnesses typically suffered by veterans. A 2014 study of people with PTSD showed a greater than 75% reduction in severity of symptoms when patients were using marijuana to treat their illness, compared to when they were not. A legislative version of the Daines-Merkley Amendment was included in groundbreaking Senate medical marijuana legislation introduced in March. The Compassionate Access, Research Expansion, and Respect States CARES Act is the first ever bill in the U.S. Senate to legalize marijuana for medical use and the most comprehensive medical marijuana bill ever introduced in Congress. That bill was introduced by Senators Cory Booker, Democrat of New Jersey, Rand Paul, Republican of Kentucky, and Kirsten Gillibrand, Democrat of New York, and it generated enormous interest. With the Senate approving one element in the bill, supporters say it's now time for the Senate Judiciary Committee to hold hearings on the full CARES Act. The politics around marijuana have shifted in recent years, yet Judiciary Chairman Chuck Grassley hasn't held a hearing on this bill, said Bill Piper, Director of National Affairs for the Drug Policy Alliance. We will move the CARES Act piece by piece if we have to, but now is the time for the Senate to hold a hearing on the bill as a whole. Also in the U.S. this week, the DEA chief called medical marijuana a joke, and patients are now calling for his resignation. Last week, Acting Administrator Chuck Rosenberg of the Drug Enforcement Administration called medical marijuana a joke while talking with reporters. Medicinal cannabis patients are now calling for Rosenberg's resignation, with an online petition getting more than 16,000 signatures on change.org. What really bothers me is the notion that marijuana is also medicinal, because it's not, Rosenberg said in a Q&A with reporters. We can have an intellectually honest debate about whether we should legalize something that is bad and dangerous, but don't call it medicine. That is a joke, he said. There are pieces of marijuana, extracts or constituents or component parts, that have great promise medicinally, he said, obeying his masters in Big Pharma, who seem to want to market individual cannabinoids but not the whole organic plant itself. But if you talk about smoking the leaf of marijuana, which is what people are talking about when they talk about medicinal marijuana, it has never been shown to be safe or effective as medicine, he said. Rosenberg's argument that smoking marijuana has never been shown to be safe or effective as medicine has been contradicted, of course, by numerous scientific studies. A meta-analysis of 79 medical marijuana studies involving 6,462 patients, published in the Journal of the American Medical Association earlier this year, found moderate quality evidence to support the use of cannabinoids for the treatment of chronic pain and spasticity. There was low quality evidence suggesting marijuana had therapeutic applications for other conditions as well, according to JAMA. Marijuana's promise for pain control is important, since pharmaceutical painkillers don't just kill pain, they also all too often kill patients. More than 16,000 people died of opioid overdoses in 2013, according to the CDC. Studies have found that the availability of medicinal cannabis at the state level is associated with a significant reduction in painkiller abuse and overdose deaths. The federal government officially considers marijuana a Schedule I controlled substance by definition, meaning it has no medical value and a high potential for abuse. But most researchers long ago rejected this claim, with the Brookings Institution, the American Medical Association, and the ACLU arguing that the Schedule I designation is inappropriate and indefensible. My mom is a legal patient in Rhode Island, and she uses medical marijuana to deal with the severe pain she experiences from multiple sclerosis, said Tom Angel, chairman of Marijuana Majority, which started the Change.org petition demanding Rosenberg's resignation. Medical cannabis is no joke to my family or the millions of other American families who have seen its real benefits, Angel said. To clarify, Acting Administrator Rosenberg indicated that marijuana should be subject to the same levels of approval and scrutiny as any other substance intended for use as a medicine. A hairy DEA bureaucrat emailed in a vain attempt to spin Rosenberg's faux pas. DEA supports efforts to research potential medical uses of marijuana. To this end, DEA has never denied a registration request from anyone conducting marijuana research using FDA-approved protocols. The spokesman lied. Rock star Melissa Etheridge joined the calls for Rosenberg's resignation with a Twitter post supporting the Change.org petition. In Oregon this week, lawmakers say the university and Department of Agriculture are both resisting hemp. Oregon State University and the Oregon Department of Agriculture have screwed up a chance to make the state a leader in the production of industrial hemp, according to Democrats in the state's congressional delegation. The congressional representatives have publicly and privately criticized Oregon State University and the state agency for their apparent reluctance to embrace the potential of hemp. The lawmakers are trying to learn why, despite a successful effort from Congress to open the doors to hemp cultivation for farmers, Oregon is failing to seize the opportunity to encourage this promising industry. It's insane that we're having this conversation today, said Representative Earl Blumenauer, Democrat from Portland, who is among the most outspoken supporters of cannabis in Congress. Blumenauer led the charge for the 2014 Farm Bill, which included a provision making it legal for state departments of agriculture or universities to run pilot research programs on industrial hemp in preparation for the full legalization of hemp cultivation. Since the Farm Bill was passed, farmers in other states have grown industrial hemp, a non-psychoactive variety of the cannabis plant which is utilized for fiber, edible seeds, topical oils, biofuels, building materials, and for medicinal benefits. A variety of bureaucratic roadblocks and setbacks resulted in just 9 farmers statewide planting hemp this year, despite its potentially highly profitable future for Oregon farmers. Colorado farmers, by way of contrast, harvested thousands of acres of hemp this autumn. The Colorado Department of Agriculture used its authority to license hemp farmers, protecting them from the Federal Drug Enforcement Administration. Other state departments of agriculture are also moving to allow researchers and farmers to grow hemp. The THC content of the hemp is artificially limited to just 0.3% THC, the principal psychoactive ingredient. Now, according to hemp expert Paul Stanford of the Campaign for the Restoration and Regulation of Hemp, the too low THC limit restricts the production of cannabis varieties, which could produce both more hemp seed oil and more fiber than these low THC varieties. In Oregon, the Department of Agriculture and Oregon State University have dragged their feet and never explicitly set up a hemp research pilot program. State agriculture officials claim that the 2009 state law legalizing hemp in Oregon didn't lay out a way for them to create a pilot program as later outlined by the Farm Bill. Department of Agriculture Director Katie Koba and Lindsay Ng, an employee at the agency oversees hemp production, had no comment. Representative Blumenauer, along with Representatives Suzanne Bonamici, Kurt Schrader, Peter DeFazio, and Senators Ron Wyden and Jeff Merkley, all of them Democrats, sent a joint letter August 10th to Koba and Daniel Arp, who is Dean of OSU's College of Agricultural Sciences, asking for a timeline to set up the framework to protect hemp researchers and farmers. Nearly 3 months later, Koba and Arp haven't yet formally responded. A Department of Agriculture spokesman said on Tuesday the agency will respond with a letter soon. OSU officials declined to comment. Representative Greg Walden, Oregon's only GOP congressman, also voted for the 2014 Farm Bill and is a co-sponsor, along with Oregon's Democrats, of a congressional bill that would legalize hemp nationwide. Blumenauer followed up last month with another letter of his own, sent this time to OSU President Ed Ray, saying there should be no reason for the university to drag its feet when it comes to hemp. We changed federal law through the 2014 Farm Bill provision to allow for this research and had discussions that should have clarified this issue, Representative Blumenauer wrote in the October 20th letter. It will happen. The question is whether Oregon State University is going to be left behind, Blumenauer said. It could be Washington State. It can be in California. The work will be done. After declining to answer questions about its hemp research program, OSU announced on Thursday it had applied for a hemp permit and decided it would undergo fundraising efforts and start a research program. There is unfortunately a lack of leadership at the ODA, the Oregon Department of Agriculture, according to Representative Peter Buckley, a Democrat from Ashland. The department has the authority and the expertise to take the lead on building a solid foundation for hemp farming in Oregon, he said. It is incredibly frustrating that Director Koba refuses to do so. As a crop, we would like to see industrial hemp just like every other crop in Oregon, said Director of State Public Policy Jenny Dresler of the Oregon Farm Bureau. The ability for growers to grow what they want and when they need to is a big issue for us. Also on the hemp front in the United States, hemp seed oil production is being hobbled by these low THC limits, with energy independence beckoning. Now, what if I told you that every legal hemp field in the world is being artificially limited in its productivity? According to hemp expert Paul Stanford, high THC varieties of cannabis can substantially outproduce low THC hemp varieties when it comes to both hemp seed oil production, which can be used both as fuel and as a food source with important proteins and essential fatty acids, the EFAs, and it can also be used for hemp fiber production. Stanford, of the Campaign for the Restoration and Regulation of Hemp, which owns Hemp News, wants a study to quantify just how much more productive fields of high THC cannabis could be for both hemp seed oil and for fiber production. I've been working to get a graduate student at Oregon State University to help us quantify high THC hemp production, Stanford told Hemp News on Friday. I talked to the student. We went to her professor. Her professor ran it up the flagpole and eventually got it to the president's office at OSU, he said. They said you can't do studies on industrial hemp because it's illegal under federal law, and because that OSU could be in danger of losing its land-grant college status, Stanford said. I was told there are only 10 or 11 federal land-grant universities and colleges in the United States, and that they were afraid they'd lose that federal funding because hemp violates federal law. I never got to talk to them about this, but they are mistaken about this being a violation of federal law because federal law directly allows them to regulate industrial hemp and medical marijuana, Stanford said. Those two things are not in direct contradiction of federal law. According to Stanford, Section 903 of Title 21, the Federal Uniform Controlled Substances Act, says that federal law does not impede the states from having jurisdiction over marijuana, and that federal law is secondary. Normally, you hear this argument over and over again that federal law trumps state law, which is true in most cases, Stanford told us. But in this case, Title 21, Section 903 says that states have the right to regulate medical practices and pharmaceuticals unless there is a conflict. Industrial hemp is excluded from the Controlled Substances Act. Additionally, Stanford pointed out the new Farm Bill had language inserted in it specifically allowing industrial hemp research at universities. Thanks to the leaders of the Oregon Congressional Delegation, the federal 2014 Farm Bill provided important authority regarding hemp research, said Steve Clark, OSU Vice President for University Relations and Marketing. A provision in the bill enables higher education institutions to conduct industrial hemp research if the institution is located in a state in which industrial hemp production is legal. Now, faculty at OSU's College of Agricultural Sciences have just submitted an application to the Federal Drug Enforcement Administration seeking permission to conduct industrial hemp research. OSU faculty members believe there is interest within the state to promote the hemp's agricultural and economic opportunities. Jay Noller, head of the Crop and Soil Science Department in the College of Agricultural Sciences at OSU, said the university hopes to secure approval from the DEA and the Oregon Department of Agriculture to begin approved industrial hemp research trials for the 2016 growing season. The research likely would focus on learning more about the crop's productivity, yield, and growing conditions in western Oregon. We still need to secure funding for the research once the other hurdles are cleared, Noller said. OSU expects that the results of peer-reviewed research regarding industrial hemp will be available in 3 to 5 years, and that research planned over that time frame will require as much as $2.5 million in funding. So we have this project to basically quantify high THC hemp seed production, Stanford said. It's never really been about drugs. Drugs are a smokescreen. It's always been about money and power, particularly the petrochemical industry. As long as they prohibit hemp production, even from plants which contain hardly any THC at all, and certainly from high THC plants, they are protecting the petroleum industry, he said. Probably people at the time the marijuana laws were implemented didn't realize this, Stanford said. Probably many don't realize it today, but many do. If we institute hemp as a fuel, food, and medicine crop, we'll have plentiful fuel, food, and medicine for all. The petrochemical and pharmaceutical industries are afraid of that. Even though doctors, the American Medical Association, opposed marijuana prohibition when it first came in 1937. We've been working on setting up this study, and I believe if we could do it, basically a study has to take at least 3 years, Stanford said. We want to quantify the hemp seed oil production of high THC strains I've developed, which are very productive strains. So far, we've been stymied in our attempts to get this study off the ground because of this problem at OSU. According to Stanford, he's working with the Agricultural College in Uruguay, where hemp and cannabis are legal, to go ahead with the program, with the assistance of OSU Professor Andrea Herman, who has taught a hemp-centered course for 5 years now. It's something like a 20-class course, and they came in and said one of those classes she can't teach anymore because of federal law. She thinks that is ridiculous, Stanford said of Professor Herman. Hemp could change the entire agricultural paradigm across the world because farmers will have a very valuable energy crop to replace petroleum, which is carbon negative, Stanford said. That's why we need to show how much hemp seed high THC cannabis can produce. Now, according to Stanford, one study showed that furrow hemp can produce 8,000 pounds of seed per acre. That's almost 15 times the amount produced in Canadian hemp fields, which produce 6,000 pounds of seed per acre with low THC hemp, which Stanford calls dwarf hemp. 600 pounds of seeds, rather. But if we produce a high THC variety and try to get the maximum seed production out of those, Stanford said, I believe that number could be substantially higher than with furrow hemp plants. With modern agricultural techniques, we could get 20 or 30 times as much seed production as Canada's hemp fields. We want to do this study, and I think the study has the potential to change the energy paradigm of the world, Stanford said. So far, we've been blocked by federal law and OSU believing that federal law stops them from studying hemp. I say they're mistaken. If hemp produces 8,000 pounds of seeds per acre, according to Stanford, that equals roughly 300 gallons of hemp seed oil per acre. Well, the most productive seed oil crops are soybeans, rapeseed, which is canola oil, and sunflowers. each producing 100 to 115 gallons an acre, according to Stanford. So if this number from the Farrell study is correct, and Stanford believes we can do quite a bit better, then it's 3 times more productive than any other seed oil crop. That means we could produce it a lot cheaper than petroleum. The food and fiber production are a lot higher as well, so we can harvest food, fuel, fiber, medicine, and adult social use flowers all from the same crop. That is going to change the entire economic paradigm of the whole world, according to Stanford. You and I can't compete with the petroleum industry, Stanford said. It takes billions of dollars to build a refinery these days. But a hemp seed press costs $2,000. And any farmer can press hemp seed oil for the market and produce at least 300 gallons per acre. As long as we're using low THC hemp, it doesn't compare, according to Stanford. But if we take away the THC restrictions from industrial hemp, when we can grow high THC cannabis for hemp seed production, that's going to allow farmers to produce several more times the fuel of other crops, in addition to the food, fiber, medicine, and ancillary products for adult social use. If we're making fuel out of hemp, all the rest of this stuff becomes ancillary products, Stanford pointed out. This can change the paradigm if we can get farmers to adopt it. It will completely decentralize economic control and put the power in the hands of the masses instead of in the hands of the wealthy where it is now. That's why marijuana prohibition has always been about money and power, specifically the petrochemical industry. My goal is to do this study and show that high THC cannabis can produce even more seed oil, protein, and fiber than low THC hemp, and therefore we don't have to use petroleum, Stanford told us. If we can do this study, it can change the world. In New York this week, Governor Cuomo signed a medical marijuana emergency access bill. After months of pressure from patients and advocates, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo on Wednesday signed this bill that will expedite access to medical marijuana for critically ill patients. In June, with overwhelming bipartisan support, both houses of the legislature passed A7060 and S5086, directing the state to establish a program to help critically ill patients obtain emergency access to medical marijuana as soon as possible. The bill was delivered to the governor on October 30th, and he had until Wednesday to either sign or veto the bill. The bill instructs the state to issue patient cards to qualified critically ill patients as soon as possible, making it clear that they are medical marijuana patients and affording them some protection from law enforcement and child protective services. Patients in New York have waited long enough for legal access to medical cannabis, said Roger Volodarsky, founder and CEO of local Brooklyn-based vaporizer technology company Puffco. It's outrageous that they have been forced to go years without relief while politicians procrastinate. But this new law means that the day when those who need marijuana-based medicine will be able to safely obtain it from legal businesses will be here sooner rather than later. Patients, families, and advocates had rallied on Tuesday outside Governor Cuomo's Manhattan office to urge the governor to sign the bill. People living with HIV, AIDS, and community organizing groups like Vocal New York and ACT UP stood in solidarity with those advocating for emergency access outside the governor's office, recalling a time when they were also denied access to life-saving medicines. I am so very relieved that Governor Cuomo has signed this bill, said Missy Miller of Atlantic Beach, whose son Oliver suffers from life-threatening seizures. I once again have hope that I will be able to offer my son the chance at significant relief. This gives Oliver and the truly sickest patients across New York the opportunity to get access to medical marijuana expeditiously, thereby relieving suffering, Miller said. This has been an incredibly long and difficult process, but I have renewed faith in my home state. This will become real to me when Oliver gets the medicine he needs. Since the medical marijuana law passed a year ago, not one patient in New York has been able to access medical marijuana. Tragically, at least 4 children who would have likely benefited from it died while waiting to obtain this much-needed medicine. Just last month, longtime medical marijuana advocate Beverly McLean, who had metastatic cancer, passed away without ever benefiting from the law she helped pass. New York's medical marijuana program is slated to become operational in January 2016, but some fear that program will not come online as scheduled. The state has yet to launch a system for patients to register and just unveiled the mandatory doctor training in mid-October. Recent media accounts suggest that several of the planned dispensaries are having trouble finalizing sites. With only 20 dispensaries statewide for almost 20 million people across 54,000 square miles, the failure of even one dispensary to open is problematic, especially to those who are critically ill. We're heartened that Governor Cuomo did the right thing and signed this emergency bill, said Julie Netherland, New York Deputy State Director at the Drug Policy Alliance. Patients in New York are suffering, and some patients' lives are at risk every day they are forced to wait. There's no real victory until critically ill patients get their medicine. In Illinois this week, the first medical marijuana dispensaries opened. Illinois' very first dispensaries have opened across the state, with 5 opening on Monday, including locations in Addison, Canton, Marion, Mundelein, and Quincy. So far, a total of 8 shops have been approved by the Illinois Department of Public Health, with 7 more dispensaries expected to open later this month, bringing the total number of medical marijuana dispensaries operating in Illinois to 15. In order to be protected under state law, Illinois patients must obtain their medical marijuana from one of these licensed dispensaries. This is a great day for suffering patients who have been waiting to have access to this medicine, said Chris Lindsay. He's a legislative analyst for the Marijuana Policy Project. We are grateful they will no longer have to put themselves at risk by purchasing it in an underground market. Under the Illinois Medical Cannabis Pilot Program, patients must register and select one designated dispensary as their source of medicine. According to the Illinois Department of Public Health, 3,300 patients have registered for the medical cannabis ID cards. The dispensary openings mark the most significant milestone since the pilot program began nearly 2.5 years ago, according to Lindsay. A limited number of patients with certain conditions will now be able to legally access medical marijuana, he said. We hope the state can see that a program like this works, and we can finally relieve the suffering of Illinois' most vulnerable citizens. Finally, this week, our Cannabis POW of the Month is our must-read story. You can see it at tokesignals.com. It's from activist Sherry Sicard, who does so much for marijuana prisoners. Andy Cox is serving life for pot. Now, when the media talks about harsh sentencing for nonviolent drug crimes, we often hear about mandatory minimums as the culprit. And while it's true these sentences that take away the judge's ability to judge are often the culprit, the biggest reason people get egregiously long sentences, even life, is usually ignored, and that's America's conspiracy laws. Andy Cox, like most people serving a life sentence for a nonviolent marijuana offense, got caught in such a conspiracy charge. The conspiracy statute holds everyone involved in the conspiracy responsible for the crimes of everyone else allegedly in on the conspiracy. The last one in the group to cooperate by implicating others ends up paying the steepest price, while their co-defendants get off with little or no prison time. And if, like Andy, you decide to exercise your constitutional right to a trial, be prepared to rot in prison for a very long time. The decks are stacked against you, and because the courts far prefer cases to be settled with a plea deal rather than with a trial, the sentences are always the maximum amount a judge can impose. To find out more about the case of Andy Cox and how you can help with men who are serving life for pot, see tokesignals.com. See you again next week. Until then, stay lifted.